Now, I've owned the flagship Arendal Sound 1723S speakers for a couple of years now, and admittedly though they sound absolutely great, they are pretty big, so they aren't for everyone. There's also the smaller 1723S speakers, but what if even those are not small enough? Well, the 1961 line aims to give you that great Arendal sound and build quality, but in a more compact cabinet size. Can they live up though? Well, this is the review. Stick around.
Perfect.
Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech, and I've had the 1961 speakers in my home theater for a little while now, testing it to see just how good it performs. The speakers are surprisingly small and compact, especially after getting used to the bigger speakers over the past few years. And since they were so small, I was able to do something really cool, and that's use 4 of these towers in my setup, where I had 2 towers and the monitor up front as my LCR and 2 towers in the back to use as my surrounds. Normally surround speakers would be smaller bookshelves, but here I'm surrounded by identical towers, which is pretty cool. The panning of sound in the room should be nothing but seamless. Okay, so in the box you'll find the very well packaged speakers, which is surrounded by a lot of thick foam to protect it during shipping. Then you'll find the product information booklet and the 2-piece grill, which I never use. Then there's the accessories box, which contains all you need to assemble the feet, whether it be the flat ones for hardwood floors or carpet spikes. The speaker finish is a bit different from what you'd get on the 1723 line, where instead of a smooth enamel-like satin finish, it's more textured. It still looks good though and has a solid feel that complements the finish. Unboxing the center channel speaker was pretty much the same experience, but I was genuinely surprised at how small they were, especially compared to the 1973 that I'm used to, and it comes in either a black or white finish and has 4 5.5-inch woofers, a 1-inch soft dome tweeter, and accepts up to 350 watts max RMS of power, and has a frequency response of 39 Hz to 20 kHz with the port unplugged and 49 Hz to 20 kHz in sealed mode. The matching 1961 1V subwoofer is a relatively compact rear-ported sub with a side-mounted 12.2-inch driver behind a magnetically attached grille. On the back of the sub you'll find the digital controls that control everything from the gain to the built-in EQ settings. Below that are the speaker level and RCA inputs, the left one being for LFE, along with a power switch. It comes in the same 2 finishes as the speakers and measures at 22 inches high, 15 inches wide, and 19.5 inches deep. It has a frequency response of 16 to 200 Hz plus or minus 3 dB. Like I said, I arranged the speakers in a 5-channel configuration with 2 towers and a center channel up front and another pair of towers as surrounds in the back. Up top in the ceiling are 4 of my Martin Logan in-ceiling speakers for a 5.2.4 configuration. The speakers will be driven by a Trinnov Altitude 16 processor and powered by a PowerSound A51 power amplifier, which can provide up to 400 watts per channel into 4 ohm speakers like these, which is a bit more than the 350 watts max that they are rated at. To test the speakers, I'll have acoustic correction enabled on the Trinnov for movies, so we can properly manage the speaker response in the room, as well as enabling the crossover for bass management as well. And for music, the Altitude 16 will have acoustic correction disabled. I measured and calibrated the speakers using the Trinnov's 3D microphone and web UI interface. I've also developed what I think is a pretty stressful target curve to use during movie tests, and that is sure to push the capabilities of both the speakers and the subs, where I have a 8 dB boost in the speaker response below 100 Hz. And how the boost works in this case is, since the low end gains happen above the crossover point of 80 Hz, then the boost begins at the speaker level before being crossed over to the subwoofer, so it will also test the mid-bass performance of the speakers as well. And the great thing about the Trinnov is I can apply this exact same target curve to any speakers I review after I've calibrated them. So what were the results and what do I think? Well, the speakers measured very well in my room with a frequency response that was pretty flat for the most part, with a couple of peaks and nulls in the lower ranges below 200 Hz. I did find it interesting though how much of a roll-off that occurs after 15 kHz in my room. You can tell the room is a factor since both speakers roll off to varying degrees. So that brings up an important caveat to keep in mind, that this frequency response was measured in my room at my main listening position and not at the speakers themselves. So room acoustics play a huge role in the graph you see. As a result, the same measurements would look different in your space. The pair of 1961 1V subwoofers measured well too, and although their stated plus or minus 3 dB range was stated at 16 to 200 Hz, I found that most of the usable output in my room was under 150 Hz, which is perfectly fine in my case since the bass from the speakers get crossed over to the subs at 80 Hz. The important thing about these graphs and numbers is that they dictate the overall capabilities of the speakers in my space and what to expect. But enough about those, how do they actually sound? First, let's talk about the sound characteristics. Like the bigger 1723 speakers, these have a very smooth and detailed top end that's on the warmer side of neutral and not harsh in the least. That's a characteristic that could be aided by the roll-off that happens at the highest frequencies above 15 kHz, which tend to be inaudible for some people and can be the harshest on the ears. In music, vocals come across very clearly and has the level of detail one would expect in critical listening without being bright or harsh. It's one of the characteristics I liked about the bigger 1723 speakers, and is one that the 1961 shares. But that's not too surprising because all the Arendal speakers are timbre matched, so you can mix and match different versions depending on your room and needs. The speakers produce a large sound stage that's deceptively bigger than what you'd expect from such small speakers. They are on the forward side, and the tweeters nestled in the waveguide created a detailed soundstage with locked-in center imaging. They had great dispersion too for anyone listening outside of the sweet spot at the MLP, even on the edges of the sectional with high frequency detail that was well conveyed. The speakers filled my room with sound that was full with great detail in the high end and surprising amount of bass. Instruments like kick drums or 808s came across very well with great reinforcement, though it lacked the tactile feel you'll get from bigger towers. You could confidently listen to music with them at high volumes without a subwoofer, but at lower volumes the bass response isn't as pronounced. So if a pronounced bass response regardless of volume is your preference, then that's where I'd recommend adding a sub, a job which the 1961 1V is quick enough to be more than capable of doing. That said, I brought these speakers close to reference without them sounding strained in the least. In fact, the music demo, which should be live depending on when you're watching this video, was recorded at -15 dB from reference, which is much louder than I typically listen to music. Suffice it to say that these are great for music and didn't have me feeling that they lacked anything besides some bass at lower levels. For movies, I thought it was really important to test the dynamics of these speakers to see if they could live up to the high expectations set by its bigger sibling. I used the race scene in Ready Player One because of all the high and low frequency effects going on simultaneously, and sound from that movie was very well rendered, as good as you'd expect to hear it. The same was true for musicals like Encanto and The Greatest Showman, which are the other reference materials that I used, and two of my favorite movies in fact. So even though the speakers had a lot to live up to with these movies that I've heard a lot of, it passed with flying colors. Movie playback was of course helped in huge part by the 1961 1V subwoofers. The 1V is ported with digital controls on the back and also works with the Arendal Sound app for added convenience to manage the subwoofer. It has two EQ modes in both vented and sealed configs. For my test though, the sub also had the 18 dB gain from the target curve applied to it, and it was a beast of a small sub. The scenes like the dinosaur stomping or King Kong swinging in Ready Player One was awesome. The bass was impactful and tactile in my room. The sub is fast enough to not call attention to itself during critical listening music sessions, but when in a pair like I have here in my room can do some serious house shaking in their own right. At no point during my test did I feel like the subs were bottoming out or unable to manage what I was asking of them. The tank fight in Fury was one of those demanding scenes where the performance of the subs really impressed me, and that's why I decided to include it in the movie demo. And that video should be live depending on when you're watching the review. The sub created some deep bass extension for those atmospheric scenes like the intro to Blade Runner, and was fast enough for those percussive notes in Fury when the machine guns were being fired, which is what you want from a high performance subwoofer. Suffice it to say, I really like it, and I think if you have a small to medium sized room, it would do very well in your setup too. So who are these speakers for? Well, I think if you have a small to medium sized room and you want reference quality sound, then these would do great in your space. And if you're tight on space and you're thinking of using bookshelf speakers, then these would be a no-brainer. They're small enough to have a relatively tiny footprint but have some really big sound. You can't go wrong, so I've left links in the description for anyone who wants to learn more or even buy these speakers. Let me know what you think about the 1961 speakers and the 1V subwoofer in the comments, and if you'd use towers for your front and surround speakers. It is pretty cool. Thanks again to Arendal Sound for sending these speakers out for review, and don't forget to like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't for more audio and video content. TV season is about to get in full swing after all. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood villain man saying be safe and peace.